Fred, I can't wait to get into this, but maybe start us off by just helping us understand. And so you started with ALA, then ALU, now ALX. Like, tell us a bit about this journey and what led you to decide to launch ALX. Like, why did you decide that we needed this, and what has kind of informed your approach at ALX?
Thank you, Wendy. So I suppose the genesis of ALX really starts 20 years ago, when myself and others like Chris Bradford co-founded the African Leadership Academy. And, I'd grown up all across Africa. I'm from Ghana originally, but I left Ghana when I was 4, and I lived in Gambia, I lived in Botswana, I lived in Zimbabwe. And then later on worked in South Africa and Nigeria and Ghana. So I fell in love with the continent of Africa. And, the more I looked, I realized that we actually have all the resources we need to develop. We have abundant rain, abundant sunshine, all the gold and diamonds and minerals. Everything we're in some ways, we're the richest continent in the world, right? But we also, in other ways, are the poorest continent in the world, right? In terms of, if you start to measure our actual economic, the value that we're creating from all these resources. So, and I ended up concluding that the thing that really was going to make or break Africa was the quality of its leaders. And so, because where I saw things were going well, we had good leadership. Where things were not going well, the leadership wasn't up to speed. So I thought, instead of just sitting and hoping that we get good leaders by accident, could we actually develop a system that would develop leaders in a more systematic way? And so that's what led us to develop the African Leadership Academy, high school 2-year program in South Africa. That took off in 2008. We're picking young people from all across Africa, and they were going to top universities around the world, but there were a couple of problems with it. One is it was small, right? We were only able to take 125 people a year, and we're training 250 people at a time. And so I realized that, if Africa is going to be 40% of the world's population by the end of the century, 250 young leaders at a time is not enough. We need something much bigger scale. The other challenge was that most of our graduates are leaving Africa to go to college in the US. They were going to Stanford and Harvard and Yale. And I said, we need our own versions of these world-class universities. So that's what led to African Leadership University as the next stage. And we built that, and today we have a campus in Mauritius and Rwanda. We have 3,000 students. But then 7 years ago, I realized that, most people couldn't afford to come to ALU because, it's a fully residential program in the middle of the ocean in Mauritius or in Rwanda. And it turns out that most families in Africa can only afford to pay a few $100s for education. So it was inaccessible. So we had to take the model closer to people. So we said we need a model that is much more localized. So people don't have to fly anywhere. They don't have to think about housing or food and everything. That's one. The second thing is also that it wasn't, and so that was limiting our scale. The other thing I realized was that technology was becoming a very powerful force in the world. But I was concerned that there wasn't much diversity in technology, the talent that was building technology. There weren't enough women in technology. And you also didn't have people who necessarily had the ethical foundation to build technology that would be useful for humanity, because things like artificial intelligence are very powerful, but if it's not infused with the right ethics and values, it can be dangerous for the world. And so we thought, why don't we take some of the work we've been doing in leadership and ethics development at the academy and the university, and then infuse that with technology training and build something that would be truly scalable, much more locally accessible. And that's really what led to ALX. And today we went, in 2020, we were training 50 people. And by 2024, we were training 700,000 people. Because that's how scalable it is, and the journey is just starting.
Wow, incredible. And through that whole journey, this is a very big question, but what have you come to think it takes to equip young people to shape a better future? Like, trying to get at, like, what are the big kind of insights or principles that are kind of undergirding ALX's kind of approach to doing that?
Well, thanks, Wendy. Great question. I think a couple of things that I've learned. One is that young people are yearning for purpose, right? In this world where, education and information has become ubiquitous because of AI and, the internet and so forth. The what is now much, much easier to understand. The why is now the thing that is harder. So we start with the why first, and we try and center young people around their why. Why do they exist? What are they trying to achieve? How can they have impact in the world? So really exposing them to a process where they get to reflect on their own mission. So, and it's derived, we have something very similar at African Leadership University. Most universities give you a menu of academic disciplines, a Bachelor of Arts in History, Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, and so forth. We said that if you're developing leaders' roles is to be, the leaders are there to be problem solvers. So let's give them a menu of the problems facing the world, not the academic disciplines. So we give them a menu of climate change, healthcare, urbanization, gender issues, governance, youth unemployment, all the food security. We say these are the big problems that the world is facing. And so which of these problems do you want to solve? And we challenge the young people at the university to say, choose a mission and not a major. Like, don't declare a major, an academic major, declare a mission. So we have the same ethos at ALX. And that's why, before people learn software engineering and data science and cloud computing, we expose them to the problems of the world first in 6 months. They have to go through learning about all these big challenges in the world. And then we expose them to ethics and values. And then we say, now let's teach you how to use AI. So now you become a purpose-driven, technology leader where you're like, I want to build AI to improve health. I want to build AI for education. I want to use AI for climate change. So that's one of the most critical things that we've learned. The other thing is we have to build a confidence in young people, because traditional education, especially in Africa, people's agency has been taken away from them. I remember when I went to schools in different countries in Africa, the typical experience was the teacher comes into the classroom, they start writing on the board, you copy the notes, and that's the end of class. There's no discussion, there's no engagement, you don't challenge your teacher. And so you are scared of speaking up. You don't want to express yourself. So one of the things we really do is really try and give young people a voice and say, you are the driver of your learning. Shifting the learning, the responsibility of the learning from the teacher to the young person. That's really the breakthrough here, because we don't have enough good teachers. We have a few. And so the idea is, how do you get those few good teachers and amplify them to touch more people? And one of the ways you have to do that is by shifting the responsibility so that you're not being taught, but you're learning. And therefore you are the one who's driving your learning yourself. And so these are some of the things that we've done. And when you do that, you build a very scalable system, which is high quality and low cost. The final thing that we've learned is about the importance of culture. And that's a very, very important thing we can touch on later.
What you shared resonates so much with what we've deeply believe across Teach for All, where we know we need to develop students holistically, their sense of agency, their awareness of the world, their sense of connectedness to people and planet, well-being, and problem solving and critical thinking skills. But it's also so counter to what is happening on so many university campuses across the world. So I do just want to name that. I mean, as a network that recruits a lot of young people, the degree to which we're not fostering students' intentionality around, like, what are the big problems in the world and where am I going to put my energy against them is really stunning. So it's just so inspiring to see what you're doing at ALX. One of the things, so I had the chance recently to visit ALX in Ethiopia, and we probably talked to, I don't know, 30 or 40 ALX students. And the thing that most struck me from talking with them was just how much they have just internalized this idea that we're going to do hard things. Like, if we want to change the world, it's going to take doing hard things. And it really struck me because it just felt so countercultural in a world where there's so much focus on our own well-being, which of course we all know and believe is also really important. But I'm just wondering where your focus on creating a culture around doing hard things came from, and then what you've done to build a culture where that is so deeply embraced. Like, I even asked them about it, and they were trying to persuade me about all the reasons it's super critical to do hard things. So it's just so fascinating. So share more about that.
Yeah, I mean, so personally, I was inspired by this from actually a young woman who went to ALA. Right, so there's a young woman called Priscilla Sempere who is an ALA student, who from Malawi, who had read a book about, and it was called "Do Hard Things," and so she would had on her signature when she sent every email, "Do hard things." I was like, oh, that's a really interesting philosophy, right? And it resonated with me completely because, I grew up in different parts of Africa. My parents were not wealthy. Both of them worked for the government. My mother was a teacher. My dad worked in the civil service. But I had 3 meals a day. I had a roof over my head, and I was able to go to school, where so many people didn't have that, right? And over time, I got all these opportunities. I got scholarships to go to universities in the US. I got a great job in McKinsey and so forth. So I used to wonder, why me? Why am I getting all these opportunities and others are not? And I realized a part of it was just luck. But I also realized that I realized how incredibly privileged I was. And so I realized that, or I guess I formed the view that if you're lucky enough to be educated, to be healthy, to be alive, to have access to resources, then the only way you can justify your privilege is by doing hard things and solving big problems for the world, because you're in the top 1% of the top 1%. So your job is not to do easy things, is to do the hard things. And that's the reason you got these opportunities, right? And so we're very clear with these young people that, if they want to justify the chance to get an experience like ALA or ALU or ALX, then you got to go out there and do hard things. Otherwise, you don't deserve to be here. And so we've built a brand around that, and we're very clear that this is a hard program. So, for example, when we decided to go into software engineering, we didn't choose the easiest program. There's lots of programs online that say, oh, you can learn how to be an engineer in 5 hours a week. You can learn how to do this in 10 hours a week. We said this is 70 to 100 hours a week for 12 months. You're going to, and we're like, this is the hardest program in the world. Do you want to? So we find it's not for everyone, but those young people who are motivated by challenge, they want to test themselves. They want to say, okay. And then when you get in, and even if you come in and you don't, sometimes people enroll, they're like, oh, it's just a marketing thing. They don't really do hard things. And when you show up and you see how challenging the work is, and you're surrounded by others who are all working hard, it then pushes you up. Because one of the things that I really believe is that young people perform to expectations. So if you tell them that you can be great and that you've got what it takes, and but you surround them with others who are doing great things, but you also set expectations that it's going to be hard, then they realize, okay, I need to do the work, and then they start to then see, and it builds their confidence as they win one small thing after another, and then that's the way. The other thing is that it's very important to realize that, one thing that we're doing at ALX is that we're getting young people to understand, to learn for themselves, not for their parents or their teachers, right? So that sense of, I've found my mission. My mission is important for the world, but I need to do, and I'm privileged to be in a position where I am, and the only way I can justify that privilege is by doing hard things, and it becomes then part of our culture, and that's what is driving this.
This feels so important. I mean, for all of us who are working with this next generation.
And I think one thing is that, one thing I've learned is that in education, what a young person wants is not what they need. So what they want is easy exams. What they need is challenging assignments. What they want is, hamburgers and pizzas every day. What they need is vegetables and, a balanced diet so that they learn healthy habits. What they want is for you to give them a job or an internship on a platter. What they need is to learn how to hustle and find their own. So for example, in the early days of the ALU, we used to guarantee internships to our learners. And in the first class, I remember, I worked very hard and I got them internships in Paris, working with L'Oreal, 3 were working with Bain, 3 were working with McKinsey, somewhere in Silicon Valley. And they had amazing internships. And the second year came along and I was traveling and I called my internships person. I said, how's the internship season looking this year? They said, well, we've got 140 internships that have been offered to our students, but they've only accepted 40 of them. I said, why? What's going on? They said, oh, this one has turned down KPMG because they're waiting for McKinsey. I said, wow, they're becoming picky. You're giving them the terrible jobs and they don't want to do it. And so I realized that we're actually doing them a disservice. Because even if we find them their first job, most people are going to be in careers where they're going to have 8 to 10 jobs. So if I help you get your first job, I haven't given you the skill to find the second one and the third one and the fourth one, and I'm not going to be there for the rest of your life. So we said, no, we're going to prepare you to be job ready, but we're not going to give you a job. And so we're going to give you all the mindsets and skill sets, teach you how to hustle, how to put a resume together, how to, interview properly, how to put a GitHub profile together. And they set the expectation that you have to apply to 100, 500 jobs before you find your first one, because that's what you need, not what you want.
Yeah.
And this whole mindset of doing hard things is like what to learn, because it's a very tough world out there, and they need to learn how to deal with these hardships. And if you do that, then you're setting them up for success. And so it means sometimes you love young people, you want to do everything for them, but if you do that, you're actually setting them up for failure.
I mean, it can't be easy to foster this mindset. Like, do you get pushback on this?
Yeah, very much. I mean, especially from the young people themselves. They're like, oh, but why are you making us do all these hard things? And, I know you know all these people. Why don't you just get me a job? Or I know people who are doing these other programs, they're not working as hard. Why are you making us? But what we find is that so that first initial cohort, those first few people who go through it will complain. But once they go through it and people see how they're thriving in life, then they become your ambassadors. And then they tell the next generation, say, no, trust the process.
Yeah.
You will also be transformed as I have.
So you're just speaking to the importance of intentionality on every choice too, and building a culture around that principle, I think, which we all know is so important in any school, in any learning environment. But it's amazing to see how you've done that at such huge scale, which we'll get to in a minute. But let's talk a little further about the agency question, because to your point, like our entire school systems historically have been set up treating kids as passive receptacles of information, and you've clearly built something very differently. And I'm wondering how you've done that. Like, what have you come to think is important in order to foster students' agency?
Well, I think firstly, it's really the recognition that, education, for 700 years was done in a world where knowledge was scarce. So you had to go and get the knowledge from the head of the professor or from the library book. That's where knowledge was kept. But thanks to technology, since Google and everything came out 30 years ago, information is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So I remember when I was in college, if I was doing research, Wendy, you probably remember this. You'd go to a library and there was this thing called microfiche. And you would you want to get information from a journal, you take this film and that's where it was. And then you put on a projector and that's how you did research. Today, a child in a rural area in Africa can go onto Google and they can get more information than someone who was doing a PhD at Oxford 30 years ago, right? So information is everywhere. So it changes completely the purpose of education. So now it actually allows a young person to learn by themselves. Then they can teach each other. And then what that means now, the role of the teacher is simply to facilitate and debate and engage people in thinking through maybe some issues that they haven't learned from each other and from their peers. But it allows you to have much more student-driven learning than before, right? And also research shows that if you have to teach something to someone else, it makes you learn it much better yourself. So the agency is not only about you learning by yourself, but it's about you teaching your peers. So peer learning is a really critical aspect of this model, right? And that also teaches you all kinds of things. You learn how to work in teams, how to handle conflict, how to build relationships. These are all life skills that will support you. You learn leadership skills. And so that's really a core part of this model. And it's ultimately about building a learning system around an abundant resource, which is students, not a scarce resource, which is great teachers, right? Any model that is built around a scarce resource is not scalable. And so that's really what this is about. And if you think about it, we as human beings are naturally born self-directed learners. There's no curriculum that teaches you how to walk. You learn how to walk at 6 months. You start learning language by yourself, right? You listen to your parents, and so there's no curriculum that teaches you language. You just absorb it. So when we now go to school as age 5, we start taking that agency from you. The teacher starts telling you, and then by the time you get to high school and college, you're completely helpless. So we're trying to take you back to your 6-month-old self, your natural ability to teach yourself, and saying you were born as a natural born learner. Let's take you back to that place, and then you unleash human possibility that's infinite, because now you're not waiting for that great teacher. You can constantly learn yourself, right? The final thing I'll say is that, research shows that to effectively develop a skill, only 10% can be learned in the classroom. 20% comes from your developmental relationships with your mentors, with your peers, with your coaches. And 70% comes from doing. You have to go out and do things and apply this knowledge and do projects. So when you think of that, when you look at that 10-20-70 rule, you realize that the role of the teacher is only that 10%. And therefore, you can't do the 20%, you can't do the 7%. You need to get that young person to realize that that's how they're going to learn, and create an environment where they are constantly being challenged to do projects and learning from others and creating experience where they learn from their peers and so forth. And when you do that, you then create this person who's unstoppable. And the nice thing about it is that it's low cost, because you don't have to, that's the beautiful thing, is you have a better education at lower cost. That's the thing that the world is not. And this is especially important in the age of AI, because in the age of AI, that 10% is what is quickly, technology is doing that, but you cannot remove those developmental relationships with AI, and you also cannot remove the learning by doing with AI.
I think you're blowing our minds, Fred, because probably we all agree completely with this, but then the challenge of doing it is very significant. Like figuring out how do we flip this. I think in part because all of us adults, the teachers, the people designing, went through a different system where we internalized a different way of approaching education. So we know that it's much easier said than done, like what you're saying. And I'm wondering if you could help us understand. Maybe the question is just, what has been the hardest thing about building a system that fosters this kind of agency? Or what has gone into that? What do you see as the biggest things you have to do?
There's a couple of things that have been really hard. One is, and probably the hardest thing, is getting the teachers to get out of the way. And, again, teachers care. They're doing it. There's no ill will. They're trying, because remember, we were all brought up in a way where the teacher was the star. They were the people that were the source of the knowledge. And so when you become a teacher, you think that that's what you need to do. And you care about students. So you want to do your best for them. You want to teach them. You want to do that. And so ultimately, when you now say no, you need to actually delete your many of the things that you're doing, and enable the person to teach themselves and to teach each other and get out of the way. And you are no longer the star. If you think about it as a film, you have to change from being the star, the actor, to being the producer and the director. You're behind the scenes and you're orchestrating this experience, but you are not the star. The star is now the student. And so stepping out of the limelight and going behind the scenes and trying to orchestrate the learning experience. So going from being a teacher to a learning experience designer and a learning experience orchestrator is the single biggest thing that is needed. So it's therefore we've had to really work hard in the kind of teachers that we recruit, and then how we train the teachers, And then, but when you do this, you then actually have better outcomes. And, you can have fewer teachers and therefore you have much lower cost, but you have much higher quality experience. Or you can have not fewer teachers, but one teacher can serve many more people, right? Because now you have a model that is not only, the teacher is no longer the bottleneck in the system, right?
Yeah.
That's quite a difficult thing. And then the final thing that's hard to do is regulators. If you work in a regulated environment where the regulator says you need to have so many teachers per student, that you need the teachers to create exams, not projects. The teachers need to have so many hours of, of teaching. It becomes very hard to navigate because now the regulator is forcing you to do things the old way. So those are some of the things that have been challenging.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges we see across the world. Let's go into this. I mean, you're talking a lot about scale. And, when I think about think about the woman who spoke at the beginning in the video, and clearly the incredible quality of the education she got at ALX. Like, I think that had to cost a lot and be low scale. And yet you're reaching 700,000 people with the kind of education that she got. So how is this possible? Like, how do you think about the balance of quality? And maybe you've started to get at this, but quality, cost, and scale.
Great question, Vince. Just to give you a sense of what journey we've been on, at ALA, it costs $30,000 a year for someone to go to ALA. And there's 250 students. At ALU, the first campus is $15,000. Second campus, $4,000. At ALX, the students pay $5 a month, which is $60 a year, right? But what's surprising is that when you ask the students to rate the quality of their learning experience, we have the highest rating at ALX than in the other parts of the AL group. The average student at ALX rates their learning experience as 90% of them say 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5. And many of them who've been through master's degrees or they've done university programs before, they say that they learn more in ALX in 1 year than they learned in their 4-year undergraduate degree or in their master's program. So we've got the highest quality learning in the lowest cost model. And what we've done is the thing that we've transmitted from ALA to ALU to ALX is we've taken the culture with us. So what people, because part of education is what you do to a learner. It's the teachers, it's the books, it's the buildings, it's the library and so forth. But the other half is what the learner does for themselves. And that part comes from role modeling and inspiration and culture. And the nice thing about culture is that it's free. It doesn't cost money to transmit from one to the next. So we've taken the culture with us. And that's why we're able to reduce the cost, but increase the quality. Because typically when education is done at scale, it is low cost. Scale and low cost is low quality. When it's done at high quality, it tends to be low scale and high cost. So this is the first time where it's high speed, high scale, high quality, and low cost. And the key is really being the culture and the mindset and the different model. And if you do that, you can actually achieve some of these results that we're seeing.
Wow. I mean, I feel like we need to send a video crew and unpack every element of how you've built this and help our whole network and everyone across the Global Institute understand how you've set it up, honestly. One of the questions in the chat, and you all please do make sure you're putting your questions in the chat. I want to bring you all into this. I'm seeing a question here about how you've kind of approached the regulatory challenges, because we do live in a very highly regulated educational market around the world, and kind of what principles and tactics have been useful in thinking about or approaching that.
Yeah, to be honest, that's a very difficult thing. So a few ways we've done is we've gone to places where there are more open-minded regulators, right? Countries that are more innovative and so forth, to at least to get started, right? So we chose to go to Mauritius for a reason. It's one of the more innovative, open-minded countries. We chose to go to Rwanda for a reason, right? And then once we proved it there in these more open-minded places, we were then able to bring people from maybe more conservative places to come and see it for themselves. and then they get trust, and then they'll say, okay, this isn't just a gimmick. You're not just, playing games with our students. Because the problem, remember, for every innovation and well-meaning institution that is trying to do something different, you've got a lot of bad actors who are just fly by night trying to take advantage of students. So regulators are designed for that, to stop the bad actors. Unfortunately, they kill a lot of innovation in that process. So you have to win their trust and do something at small scale, piloting, whether it's in that country. They'll normally allow you to do a pilot, and then you can prove it and then get the results and so forth. The other thing that we really also try and do is to shift. A lot of regulation is focused on inputs, not outputs. So they measure how many teachers you have, how many library books, how many professors. In higher education, they even track things like the size of the director's office. It needs to be 5 meters wide by 5 meters. If it's not, you can't open. And all kinds of things. So, for example, when we were getting accredited in Mauritius, they wanted to see library books. So they said it's a digital world. People have access to a digital library. No, we need to. So, what do? We just got some books from home and put them up there so they could tick the box, right? So, you have to get their pilot, get their trust, and then you can scale. And then finally, sometimes it's about translation. So, understanding what are the outputs and trying to get them to measure quality based on outputs and outcomes and impact. And then, trying to translate what they have said into something that gets your outcome. So sometimes it's as simple as naming things differently. So, for example, we had this concept of missions, not majors. We say we don't really believe in people choosing academic majors, but we realized that would just, be completely anathema to the regulator. So we said we'll call it the Bachelor of Science in Entrepreneurial Leadership, right? Sounds like a traditional degree, but the way in which people actually go through it is one where they get to pick their own mission and not a major and so forth. So these are some of the things that we've learned.
Yeah. Super helpful. Okay, I'm going to bring in more of the audience questions. The first of which is, I love that you're preparing people to take on challenges like climate change, education, healthcare, and governance. How do you help them move from awareness to meaningful action?
That's a great question. So a few things. One is we really believe in building teams. So remember, as they go through the whole learning process, a key part of this is peer learning. You learn how to work with others, and solving problems and so forth. And also, as you mentioned, the learning experience is designed for application. 70% of the learning experience is by doing. You learn every day through projects. So by creating the supportive environment, you make it less lonely to try and drive change. You now build teams, you're able to create movements, you've got others that you can collaborate with, and that makes it easier to get started in actually implementing change because you're not doing it by yourself. And then secondly, by building the practice of doing things in small projects all over, you learn how to take an idea, break it down into its component parts, come up with a project plan, implement it, pilot, scale, and so forth. So that's the learning model for a year, 2, 3 years. So but by the time you go out and you say, okay, now I want to actualize my mission, you've been practicing it in small ways every day for 2 years. And the final thing is we also then have these incubators. So for example, at ALX, we have something called ALX Ventures, where people who've gone through the training program who want to work on idea can come together, and they've got a space and they've got some support that can allow them to. And last year, for example, we incubated 10,000 tech startups that came out of the ALX ecosystem, because people are like, okay, I want to build something now. And so these are the different ways in which we do that.
10,000 tech startups?
Yeah.
Okay. I need to learn more from you, Fred. Next question. What advice do you have for those of us who want to continue serving after our Teach for All Network Fellowship, especially those of us building community projects from small beginnings?
The first thing I'll say is don't dismiss those small beginnings. The small beginnings are the beginning of something much greater. So today we're talking about, what we've built in the AL group. We've raised $1.7 billion US. We have gone from ALA to ALU to ALX, training 700,000 learners and so forth. But let me tell you where it all started. It started when I was 18, right? When my mother had been pushed to start a school. She was a teacher in this town we lived in Botswana, small town, Celebi Pikwe. And parents approached her and they said, we want you to start a school. But my dad had just passed away and she had 4 kids to look after. So she said, I can't start a school and quit my job. But they kept insisting. Eventually, she said, she'll start a study group. And she started a small church building with 5 kids. And then more and more parents brought their kids. And then eventually it was 25 kids. And then she said, Fred, you need to be the headmaster of the school. So she made me the principal of the school at the age of 18. And I ran it for a year and I grew the enrollment from 25 to 50. And I taught classes. I learned how to manage teachers and so forth. That experience at 18 is what gave me the confidence and the practice to start ALA when I was 25. And then the ALA experience with 250 students is what led me to do ALU with 3,000. And then that experience is what led me to ALX with 700,000. So all the small projects you're doing now matter. And so don't dismiss it. Don't look at it and say, oh, I'm too small to do something big. So just get going. Do what you can in your own small way. And then you'll see that it'll give you the practice to do more and more. Because what you're getting in Teach for All, and Wendy, you talk a lot about this, you're not only going through an education program where you are imparting knowledge to young people. You are going through a leadership development program. And so your experience in Teach for All is you're in a leadership incubator where you're getting to practice leadership. And so see yourself as a leader, not as a teacher only. Right? Teachers are some of the most important leaders in society. So use this experience to learn leadership and then in a small way, and that'll get you to do bigger and bigger things later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I read a book called Little Bets. And if you read it, Fred, you'd just be like, you wouldn't even be able to put it down because it would resonate so much. But it's basically looking at all these big, hugely successful entrepreneurs and showing that for each of them, it was a little bet. Like it was a very little idea and they just continuously improved, like the great entrepreneurs, and we're just open to where that journey took them. So it really resonates so much, and with my own journey as well. Another question. So listening to you speak about ALA, ALU, ALX, I'm wondering how we can get that culture and cultivate that culture of building student agency and leadership in schools that are still stuck and very focused on and quite narrowly on academic outcomes.
In terms of how do you build that culture?
Like, how can we do that within, I mean, so many of the people probably listening to this are working within a highly regulated system and in schools that, you know, you're supposed to teach to this narrow set of academic outcomes. And they're saying, how do we foster this kind of agency and leadership within that environment? Like, any advice on that?
Yeah. So I think that there's more opportunities to do that than people think. Very often I think people will use the environment as an excuse to not trying. So you can do things like after school programs, deliver the curriculum from 8 to 12. There's nothing stopping you from doing your own thing from 2 to 5, right? There's nothing stopping you from doing things on weekends. There's nothing stopping you from giving people access to online programs and so forth. So there's things that you can do outside of the box that you've been put in that gets you the same outcome, right? And so my first point is that, the single biggest barrier is yourself. You need to really think about how do you actually see outside of the box that you're put in and do the little that you can within the constraints that you have, right? And that already will start to drive change. The other thing that then I would say is try to influence someone in your organization. It could be the head of your department. It could be the dean of faculty. It could be the principal, because leadership really matters. So if you can get the leaders of your school or others to think differently, maybe it's giving them a book to read. Maybe it's introducing them to some talks to watch. Maybe it's getting them to visit another institution where they're seeing a different way of learning. And you slowly try to drive change. And then once the leader is thinking differently, it'll start to create these. And then the final thing I say is do pilots. Ask for permission to say, okay, you know what, can I just do a small test with a subset of my learners? And you start to see the results. And then because also understand the things that everyone cares about, which is, like sometimes it's grades, sometimes it's getting into college, sometimes it's starting new ventures, jobs, whatever. How do you then show that the thing that you're doing gets the same outcome in a better way, in a more interesting way?
Yeah, totally. Okay, I can't believe we've made it this long without talking about AI. So here we go. Given the transformative impact of AI on education and on the world, how can we effectively develop future-ready skills in resource-limited settings? What key priorities should guide this effort?
That's a great question. So I actually wrote an article about this that I encourage everyone to read. It's on LinkedIn. It's called Education in the Time of AI, 5 things we need to change, something like that. And there I talk about how we need to think about education in this moment. And I think my advice is actually that I wouldn't be trying to force AI into my learning as much. If I don't, of course, if you've got resources, if you've got internet connectivity, you can afford to pay, and devices and everything. Yes, get people exposed to large language models. They can get personalized tutors that can give them, one-on-one attention. You can start to use AI for lesson planning, for brainstorming, for, so many things, right? But if you don't have, but again, remember that all that you're doing is only touching the 10%, right? So that 10, 20, 70 rule that I mentioned is really important in the time of AI. All that AI can do is make the 10% more efficient. So your job now is to focus as a teacher on the 20%, which is the peer learning, the learning from mentors, the developmental relationships, the confidence, the human relationships that they need to learn. And then the 70%, which is applying the knowledge, learning by doing. So therefore, if you don't have resources, don't worry. The 10, 20, 70 rule is more important now more than ever, because young people are going to be much more competitive in the world when they've learned how to do things in the real world, and they learn how to interact and navigate relationships with people, and where they've created the agency of, and purpose and so forth, than if they've just become robots listening to an AI trying to tell them things. So my advice is that, think more holistically about what education means in the time of AI. Realize that all AI is doing is making that 10% of learning more efficient. And focus your efforts as a teacher in the 20% and the 70%. And you're going to have brilliant outcomes in terms of developing people who are ready for this world. Because those who think that education is only about knowledge transfer are the ones who will not thrive in this world, because the AI is going to be more efficient in that knowledge transfer, but the AI will never be able to replicate the other two things.
So helpful to think about it that way. It's such a powerful frame. I want to get back to the hard things piece. And I'm so glad to see this question, because I have a feeling many people are grappling with it. And the question is, young people also want self-care and boundaries at work. Is there a risk that the narrative of doing hard things could be misunderstood in considering the importance of these other things? And how do you hold that tension?
That's an excellent question. I think that it's about how you explain what this means to do hard things, right? So, for example, doing hard things doesn't mean you do it alone, right? It means form teams and others that you can share the burden with, share the stress with, go on the journey with, right? So creating that sense that you don't have to do it alone, you've got a support system. It's about creating safety nets so that when people get into trouble, they overwhelm themselves, you're there to listen for them. Because, again, and the nice thing about this model of learning is that if you have created the agency where the learner is teaching themselves things, you have more capacity as the teacher to support them when the going gets tough. Because you're not the one having to do all the teaching. You're not the one spending all your time lesson planning and endless lectures and everything. You actually can be there to catch that person who needs support, who needs mentorship and so forth, because you're spending your time is different. And then the final thing I'll say is that the doing hard things mantra is something that you can get them to do in small bits, right? So doing hard things doesn't mean you have to go and do this massive thing overnight. Start small, get them to learn and get practice in winning in small things. When they then do that, it gives them confidence to do things bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So helping them to scope what they're aiming for. So someone will come with a completely unrealistic idea. I'm going to be president tomorrow. That person is just, you're setting them up for disappointment, right? How do you get them to maybe just run for class for class monitor?
Mhm.
And then they win there. And that's the do hard things that they do. And then they give
Yeah.
confidence to do something bigger and bigger. So our job is to help guide and mentor and coach them so that what they're doing builds confidence and it doesn't destroy their belief in themselves.
Yeah, thank you for all that. Going to end just in our last couple of minutes with one more question that someone in the audience asked. And I love ending with this because, I mean, our whole purpose is to develop students as leaders who can shape a better future, but we know that that means we have to develop ourselves as leaders as well. And that our kind of understanding about what leadership is needs to all be synced up. So the question in the chat was, how has your definition of leadership evolved through your journey of leadership?
My definition of leadership has in some ways stayed the same for the last 30 years, and in a couple of ways it's changed. What has stayed the same is I've always believed that a leader is an agent of positive change. And that has been, and that's the positive is a very important part, because agents of change can be dangerous for the world. Adolf Hitler was very effective in changing things, but it wasn't a positive change, right? There's so many examples of leaders today, I'm not going to name them, who are changing things, but it's not necessarily always positive. So that notion of positive change, right? And that the job of a leader is to change things. And also, a leader must have courage, they must have passion, they must have imagination, they must have values. All that stuff has stayed the same. Maybe what has changed over the years that I used to maybe think that leadership is something that you could teach. Now I've really come to realize leadership is something that people can learn. They have to learn it themselves. So and as you think about how you create and enable leaders, it's almost like you take a horse to water, but you can't force the horse to drink. So it's about thinking about creating an environment that allows leaders to learn leadership, allows young people to emerge as leaders. And that is what you can control, right? So you can control the environment, the experience and everything, but you can't force that person to learn how to be a leader. And that's some of the things that I've learned.
Yeah. So powerful and resonant. Thank you, Fred, so much for your incredible journey and all of your perseverance and vision through this, and for making the time in your incredible schedule to contribute to our global learning. And I just want to invite everyone out there in our audience. I know everyone will be reflecting, but I will too. Like, how can we foster the kind of agency and the mindsets that you're developing in these ALX students throughout our education system? So thank you, Fred. Thank you, everyone, for joining in, and look out for our next episode, which will be coming soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
So great.